Boxes to builds, number 5 or 6. And this is do's and don'ts of club making. I'm going to pick 3 do's. I'm going to pick 3 don'ts. And we have one really cool build, unbuild build to show you. So let's get started. Welcome back to the Golf Shop. Jim McCleary here, and this is where we talk about golf club repairs, golf club reviews, golf club fittings, also your scores can go low. If you would, like, subscribe, hit that stuff across the bottom, and that way this information gets out to the YouTube universe. If you want more of this kind of stuff, then join us on Mondays at 5:30, where we do a live stream video, and it's on the same channel, Facebook, X, and even LinkedIn. Under I Am McGolf or McGolf Custom Clubs, you'll find us, and it's live talking about the very same stuff. Goes about an hour to an hour and a half, very casual, and it's in front of everybody, so join us, you'll have a good time. So do's and don'ts of club making. The do's and don'ts of club making are literally infinite, right? For every time that you have a job, you can figure out something that you did right and that you either did wrong or potentially did wrong. And I've been doing this for, well, going on 20 plus years now, and there's plenty of do's and plenty of don'ts. The best part about it is if you do the do's first, you don't have to do a lot of the don'ts later. Okay, so that's the important part here. So what I have is a set of these. T350s. Now the Tius T350 is their game improvement club. I won't go so far as to say super game improvement, but these guys are very, very strong. So in the world of Titleist, in the world of golf, they are what I would consider hollow body irons, which is very popular now. Why? Because you get all the forgiveness of those big, heavy duty cavity back clubs, but they look a little more sleek in almost a modern blade-like with that cap on the back. So it gives the maker a lot of room to move, adjust, things like that. Now, for Titleist, what they've done is they've got their body, right? It's a face, a very thin face, and then it encompasses 2 large weights on the bottom. And what are the weights for? Just like everything else, when you get these lofts very, very strong, and this is a 23-degree 5-iron and a 43-degree pitching wedge, but at the bottom they're in 5-degree increments instead of 4. And that's what you have to do literally in order for things to mellow out, or, you know, so you have the same number of clubs. Other manufacturers have just added another wedge and kept it at 4, where Tius has decided to go with 5. Okay, that's just what it is. Now, the T350 has a modicum of offset. It's probably their most offset club, but it doesn't have that big turn like other manufacturers do. It's a very gentle turn into some offset. I believe this is very close to their widest sole ever. All right, it's not super duper wide like, you know, alien wedge kind of wide, but it is wider. Okay, so you have to know about that. It has a bit of a killed leading edge, but there's no real super duper sole grind. These are full swing clubs to be sure. Today we're working on a 4 through pitching wedge, and we have some special swing weight requirements, length requirements, and under grip requirements. So what are we doing? Well, we're going to take the shaft out, and the shaft is an AMT black, right? AMT black. All right, I think and I know there's black, there's white, and there's red. I'm going to guess in this particular instance, red is going to be probably the most flexible, where white might be the hardest, and the black is somewhere in the middle. Don't quote me on that one. I'm not real big in AMT shafts, although AMT stands for Ascending Mass Technology, so as you actually go down through the set, it gets just a skosh heavier, right? All right, pardon me. What are we going to put in them? We're going to put in these. All right, steel fiber. All right, steel fiber is by the Aerotech company. And for those you don't know, Aerotech was purchased by True Temper. All right, True Temper has now Aerotech, has Acra, and all their True Temper stuff. So if you're a PFC, Professional Fitting Center, you have access to all these things. And these things are pretty good. So what is the marketing on this is that the most stable, most consistent, most winning on the PGA Tour, and that's their big deal. Now they come in multiple weights, right? As low as I believe either 60 or 70, and this one are 110. So these are very, very heavy. Now what happens here is there is some it's a combination of graphite and steel, and there's some ridiculous number of feet or yards in this shaft of steel. And basically what I would say is it's incorporated into the graphite, and it's micro thin stuff that's wrapped around. But it is very, very, very consistent, very, very, very well liked by the tour. And it also tends to play way more stiffer than advertised. All right, so what we're going to see here is this golfer got the R-Flex in here. I'm going to guess it's probably going to play closer to an S-Flex, but we'll see. All right, and then what are we going to put on them? We're going to put on those. These are the Golf Pride MCC red grips. And I like the multi-compound. I like a little bit more aggressive in the texture in the back. The front has its scallops to where you can grab it if you're using the trigger instead of like that, and they're good grip. They're very, very consistent. Golf Pride does a very, very good job. So, all right, so now we know what we're doing here. So some of the do's here. The very first do is you want to be safe, right? You want to use gloves. Now, I don't use a lot of gloves. When I use doing a lot of hot work, I will use gloves. If I'm going to use something that's going to spray a lot of sparks, I'm going to use goggles because I wear glasses, or I do actually have safety glasses. Those are the two big things. Know your surrounding environment. Now, when you work with graphite and you work with steel and you're cutting all this stuff up, in this room I just spent an hour cleaning up and taking all the dust off, sweeping down the floors and making it so that you can walk around here without tripping. All right, so safety, and making sure that your work areas are clean are the first do. Because I have been in some shops where you could literally skate across floors on the graphite that was there. Not only is that a hazard from a health environment, but also a physical environment. So don't let your shops get sloppy. All right, that's number one. Number two is these are brand spanking new golf clubs. So the real trick here is how are we going to keep them looking brand spanking new? That's going to be a do and a don't. All right, so the idea of the do is we want to make sure that they stay brand spanking new. All right, now in the day, these come with the plastic already on them. All right, in the day I would tear these off for fear of melting the plastic off, and that's still a concern. In this particular one, what I'm looking for is how far down this hosel that this plastic comes. And if it comes down, I'm going to be applying heat to remove this right to here, and it's going to melt this thing off. So yeah, I'm going to probably take these off. All right, if they're up a little bit higher or the hosel was a little bit longer, I would not. Now I have done that in the past, but when you're in assembly, not a big deal. In disassembly, it's a big deal. So we're going to be removing these and we're going to take them apart. Now, these don't have any grips on them. They are naked shafts. So normally when you go to take these things off, you normally have a grip here. What we're going to be doing is putting them in the speed clamp to help me get that grip in order to turn this thing down, okay? So let's get started with some of that. All right, normally I'd be working at my bench and I would be able to twist this off, but since we're not, because of the gripless shaft, we're going to be over here. So again, application of heat, we're going to give it about 20 seconds per every about 1/3 of the shaft, or 1/3 of the hosel. Now what I'm trying to do is not melt the hosel or the ferrule. I'm not going to be reusing it, but you never know for somebody who might want it. It's not a big deal to me, but just in case. Normally I would pick these things off and not have a second thought about it. There we go. Just that easy. Not too much heat. And there you go. So now while this is hot, we're going to clean these out. All right, so that's the first of many, and the idea here is keep it looking like it did, right? And there's no smudges on it that I can tell, and you want to clean out this thing because we're going to be measuring them next. So I'm going to take care of all these, and then we'll get right back to it, and I'll show you what we... All right, so taking those things off wasn't really too bad. A lot of the cases, a lot of the OEM glue is really not that tough. I got away, it's pretty decent. They could be reused, not too bad. You have to clean up the tip. They're totally uncut, but they're two size. These must be, we call it a specific length. So that's what we got. We'll see what the owner wants to do with that, and we'll go from there. All right, so now back to the other one. The other do, we might have more than three. The other do is, in order to ensure that you're going to have a very good, consistent build, you have to weigh your stuff. Now, I have a gram scale, and no, it's not crazy expensive. If you're gonna, if you don't have any, if nothing else, if you don't have the monies for swing weight scales and things like that, a good gram scale will help you on your way. Now the other part is to have a place to record your stuff, whether it be on a computer or whatever. Of course, me being old school, I've made a chart to help me write down all the different parameters that I monitor: length, loft, lie, swing weight, total weight, flex, shaft weight, head weight, grip weight. If I add in what I've trimmed the club, any tip weights I'm going to add, and the color of the ferrule. So let's see how good these guys are. So this is what we're going to do. This is the first real do. Ensure all the stuff you're going to put together is very consistent. Now, if you're doing onesie twosie stuff like a driver shaft, or you're repairing one, you're pretty much, you know, you can take another club and measure it and get as close as you can, but you're pretty much relegated to just fixing that particular club. But we're talking about making a set. So let's put these together, or weigh them for that matter. Alright, so what do we find out? Well, we found out that in the head weight, we have 245, 249, 258. So the 6 iron is just about where I would think would be good. Let's see, we go down to 250. The 5 iron's a little bit light, so we're going to add some weight to the 5 iron. Now, you can see, although you may not, but in several cases, if you look at the ends here, there's different colors and different holes and all that kind of stuff. Those are different weights, okay? And in order to understand what we want to do here, because he wants D2 in the swing weights and D3 in the wedge. Okay, and so when we do this, they need to be at a specific number in order to make this happen. Now what I look for is a 7-gram weight increase between the heads. So 245 to 249 obviously is not it, so we'll put a 3 or 4 grammer in there, and then that would make that 255. I might make it 250, 251, and then that gives it 7 to there, and then I got 6 going to the next one, I got 10 in the next one, I got 7 in the next one, and then I got 5 in the next one because it will only be a quarter. Now what you'll see is, particularly in Titleist, that the 9-iron and the pitching wedge and all that, after the 9-iron, it's 1/4 inch increments after that. So when you're doing in length like that you only really need about 4 grams. So I got to add a couple of weights outside of that, it'll be okay. Now, here's the thing, and this is all about thinking ahead, right? Thinking ahead. Now the real trick here is he has ordered some of these steel shafts, or the steel fibers, and the hole in the end of this thing may not accept a tip weight. So what are you going to do? In a lot of cases, there's so much meat on this, I may not mind removing a little bit of, elongating the hole a little bit in order to receive it. Now, you're like, oh, Jim, you just removed some of the weight. Yes, but I'm replacing it with metal, so I'm actually making it firmer. And it's in the hosel where you don't want it to move anyway. Now, can you do that on every one of these? No, you cannot. There are some that are very, very thin, and you do not want to do it, and the hole will actually be too big, and you'll have to make adjustments to wrap some stuff around so that'll fit tight. So that's another one. Now, as far as shafts go, shafts were as low as 108 and as high as 111, about 3 gram difference. That's not bad. All right, that really isn't that bad. I'm happy with that. Of course, we'd all like to see them very much closer, but 3 grams is about the max to, if you want a quality product, 3 grams from top to bottom, that's really good. All right, and as far as the grips go, this one's actually kind of weird in that when I've done, and we've made several grips or several sets this week and this month, and a lot of them with Golf Pride, and Golf Pride is normally within a gram, right? Within a gram, which is insignificant. Now, in reality, a couple grams is insignificant, which is where this is at. We started at 146.2 and got to 48.5. So almost just a little over 2 grams. Again, insignificant. It's just kind of odd because I'm so used to them being closer and actually better. All right, so we got all that. Now here's the thing about building. We only have this set of shafts. They're all discrete lengths, and what I've noticed is that we're going to have a change here. The next measure everything, right? And we're doing that. Here's the next measure. Yeah, that's going to fit. Okay, so as a whole, Titleist uses taper tip, and the taper tips for steel fiber come in discrete lengths, and these they fit pretty good. So we're good there. And the next thing is to ensure that we have enough ferrules to compensate for this. This one has a shoulder in it, and so now we need to make sure that we have the right shoulder before we do any of the gluing whatsoever. And then we'll go from there, so stay tuned. Okay, a couple of do's and don'ts now, and then we're talking about assembly. Number one is we use 2-part epoxy to glue golf clubs together. With this particular epoxy right here, which is the 420, it is a 2-to-1 ratio, meaning 2 parts epoxy, 1 part of the hardener. The one don't is don't you dare not stir it enough. And we go about we go about 1 minute, 60 seconds in order to make that work. And what that does is that drives out air bubbles, okay? It drives out the air bubbles in there because that would be some incomplete mixing, and we don't want any of that. Okay, the other part is, and here's another don't. Don't you dare put your fingers into that stuff. All right, if you do, stop what you're doing immediately and go wash it off. All right, because what's going to happen is that you're going to touch a golf club and you're going to touch a golf shaft, and it's going to leave a fingerprint. It's going to look unprofessional. It's going to look ugly. And so just don't go, oh, I just wiped it off and move on. Go wash your hands. That one was a tip and a trick that I was taught when I was first starting out by Jim Yonanich at Golf Works. and I have learned that one the hard way. All right, you can even, while we're wiping this stuff off right here, you know, you go, oh yeah, look, I got that glue booger off there, and you go to touch it, and there it is on you again. Nope. Take that thing off. All right. The last part of this one is the ferrules themselves were a little bit too long for the shoulder. Okay, a little too long for the shoulder. And so I had to sand them down. All right, and so what I did is when we do these, I just sand them down and I fit them to each individual head. Now what do you do when you don't get a ferrule that doesn't want to fit correct? About 5 or 6 seconds, just enough to get it heated up. There we go. Pound it in a spot. We got her. And then when you put the glue on, you don't need a tremendous amount of glue. You know, don't under glue it. So if you go, I like spinning it around. If you don't think you've got it, just take a look in there and make sure you have a good even coating, of which I do. Now what'll be harder is when you have hosels that have those, what would be considered a looks like a thread. It's not, they're just ridges. And those are hard to get the glue in. All right, and again, wipe off the glue. And when you wipe off the glue, less work later. Whatever you do, don't touch it. Otherwise, you're going to be doing a second thing of work. And the trick for ferrule creep is right there. And there you go. So we're going to take off those. So we got a couple of do's, a couple of don'ts. Make sure you glue, you stir the glue for 60 seconds. Get all the air bubbles out. And the don't is don't touch it so that you don't have to come back and do it. See, just right there. I got to go. Be right back. There we go. It got me when I wasn't looking. There we go. Now the trick for epoxy is you always want to put enough, but you don't want to put a gross amount in, because the thinner it is, the better this stuff works. Okay. All right. At the end of each gluing, you want to, that's seating it, and that's just making sure it's getting down to the bottom of the hosel. There's that. And see, there's just a little bit there left. It's oozing out. All right, so when it does this, when you mix the glue, it makes an exothermic reaction, and that's sometimes it wants to go flowing. Okay, so again, we got a couple do's, a couple of don'ts for the disassembly, and now we got a couple of do's, couple of don'ts for the assembly. And now what we're going to do is we're going to let them dry, and we'll talk about one more do and one more don't, and we'll show you what the end result is. Back to do's and don'ts. I've got 3 sets of irons going at the same time. That in itself spells tragedy, okay? I like one thing at a time. However, if I'm doing it all the same, for instance, I'm doing all the gluing, or I'm doing all the ferrule turning, or I'm doing all the gripping, that's okay. But I don't want to be like, well, I got to glue this set, I got to measure that set, and don't go there. You are asking for a perfect failure. All right, so that is a don't. Don't get yourself confused. Stay in a rhythm, have the flow, get it going, and if you're going to do a bunch, you do them all the same, right? So that is the biggest thing. Now, as far as ferrule turning or anything else, anytime you work with a golf club, we'll call this the project. Now, anytime you're dealing with a project, you know, what you want to do is have it stable, right? You want to have it stable, meaning that, such as putting it in a vise for a grip, laying it on a support to turn a ferrule, or you're going to have both hands on it and working on it, like stamping it so that you get a full seat into the hosel, because you don't want to be doing this and then doing this and having a resulting of it. All right. Now there is a time where I do that with heat, but I'm not trying to manipulate the club. I'm just doing this with the heat. That gets set down, and then I'm back to 2 hands again. So the always stabilize the project. All right. Now what I'm going to show you here is this is turning a ferrule. And when I do this, I rely on my ferrule turning stand a lot, because it allows me to apply the appropriate amount of pressure so that it takes the right amount of ferrule off, so I don't undercut the ferrule. You press into this thing too much, it'll undercut it, and it's destroyed your work, and you got to start over. That is not a good thing. All right. So what we want to do here is lean into it just enough so it starts taking it off, and you always want to check it to make sure it's smooth. Great. Now what we do is I put some acetone on it to shine it up, and it takes off a lot of the grooves that may be created by the ferrule turning belt. Although the ferrule turning belt is awesome, it's way better than a lot of the other ones, but it still can happen after you get some usage into it. Now we're talking about stabilizing the project. Here's another way of doing it. Now as I'm polishing these ferrules, I'm holding it and I'm using my right hand as the turning stand, and what I'm doing in order to ensure that I'm stable, I'm still leaning up against the motor in order to give me a reference point, and then I'm holding it and then turning into it. And now I'm not pressing a whole lot, and the wheel's pretty big and it's throwing around a lot of torque, but it allows me to just touch it. Now we're just polishing it, so I don't have to lean into it too much. So that's in that stabilization of that thing. Okay, speaking of stabilization, the last bit we're going to do, I'm not going to show it to you, we're going to go to the very last part of this and then we'll be done, is cutting. All right, cutting. Now there's several different ways to cut shafts, and there's a video out there I've done a while back on how to cut shafts. But again, it's about stabilizing the project. Now what I use is a foot pedal to engage things, and I will use 2 hands in order to ensure I've got a stable project so it doesn't wobble like this. Now there are other ones where you use chop saws, where you can hold it right here, chop it down, good to go. There are also tile cutters, there's tubing cutters and whatnot, but in every instance you always have one hand on the project. You might be using the tubing cutter, or you're going to put it back in this vise and you're going to use a saw if you're doing it by hand, or you're going to do it like we did before, 2 hands and go into cut, or with the chop. Okay, so always stabilize your project. I am here to tell you it makes a world of difference. All right, so I'm going to finish cutting these. We'll get back to the last step and the last do's and don't, and we'll be done. All right, we are finally done with these Titleists that we put the Aerotech steel fibers and the Golf Pride MCCs on. Now the last do is, and it seems to be commonsensical, but as we get into a euphoria of getting done with the clubs, like, hey, I got them all done, yay, they're good, out the door they go. Well, the last thing you want to do is check your work. All right, check your work. So when we build clubs, we fill out one of these. All right, you may have seen them a couple of times on my builds, and I'm always writing stuff down. This is where we start from the beginning of checking your work, okay? This is where we say, what's our head weights, what's our shaft weights, all these different things. Then, at the end, I have these 2 categories of swing weights and total weights that I use to ensure the consistency of the build, to make sure we hit marks that maybe the customer asked for. Then we go to the loft and lies, because loft and lies, let's face it, OEMs are creating thousands upon thousands upon thousands of these golf clubs, and there's a range that they want to be. So plus or minus a degree, plus or minus 2 degrees, you know, but they're not exact, okay, not exact. And so we do the testing and the bending for that. For instance, in this particular one, and this is another one, that the customer wanted the lofts to be weakened almost to the point where it was the very next club. And we'll just get the very next club, right, and move down a number. And he was worried about making sure he had his gaps. Well, so today I had to call him, and it's a Sunday, and I say, hey, look, by going this week, you're going to impact the way that this club plays almost to the point of unplayable. You could have just went one set down, one club down, and you would have been fine. Okay, well, we don't want to do that. And he says, well, I've always liked 2 degrees weak. Well, we can do 2 degrees weak. However, it's not going to be the same 2 degrees weak. You're going to have your same gaps. They're just going to be gaps that are further down the road. And he's like, okay, I trust you. So fine, that's what we did. And we put them on our sheet so that we have a record of what we've done in order for that customer. And there you go. And that's checking your work, because the last thing you want to do is send out something that, hey, it's not, the golfer goes, hey, it's not the way I want it to be. Well, we tell them if they're going to be out of spec. Sometimes the stuff's made of unobtainium, right? It just is not going to be there. So that's what you want to do, check your work. Now, finally, and the last part of all this is, you notice how I didn't tell you about any techniques or any secrets of what to do, what not to do, put things on. Those we will discover on our own time and our own place. Now, if you guys like this and you want to know more about these types of things, put them in the show notes, and that way we'll know, what we can make a topic that you guys would be interested in. All right, so put that down there, and so we can talk the do's and don'ts of maybe pulling a shaft, or do's and don'ts of maybe putting on a grip, do's and don'ts of putting the glue together. Now, we did some of that, but you get what I'm talking about. Okay, so do's and don'ts. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hit that like and subscribe. Don't forget us about on Mondays for the live stream. Enjoy it. Come visit us. It's a good time. And as always, let's see your scores go low.